Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulih al-Kareem. Amma ba'd. We are in a world that is spinning and it is rotating, revolving, constantly in movement. And just like this earth itself is moving, A on its axis and B in its orbit, the conditions of the world are also constantly changing. In fact, one of the arguments that the old philosophers used to show that the world was not a permanent thing, that it would one day cease to exist, was a very simple but very interesting argument where they said, العالم متغير وكل متغير حادث فالعالم حادث. The world is constantly changing, and that which is constantly changing cannot survive forever. Therefore, this earth cannot survive forever. Khair, that was the old philosophers and their logical formulas. But yes, we are seeing such rapid change that I doubt any of us has seen anything like this in our lifetimes, where things around the world at a global scale have evolved and escalated so quickly and at such a massive scale. Everyone is speechless, from the people at the top to the common folk to the people on the street. Everyone is speechless. No one can explain it. And everyone is frightened. Everyone has this sense of concern, worry, and they have good reason for doing so. And extraordinary measures are taking place. I mean, I hope you'll excuse me for the reference, but those of us that were around at 9/11 thought the world got pretty tough after 9/11. And this is making the restrictions post 9/11 look pretty easy. I mean, then it was about, what you could take on a plane and so on and so forth. And now it's how much distance you must keep between the next human being and yourself. So anyways, the art of teaching and learning continues, and it does not stop. It needs to continue in any circumstance, no matter how stringent, no matter how difficult, no matter how challenging. Because in the Islamic tradition, it is this heritage of teaching and learning that gives the human being his superiority over all other creations. Were it not for the ability of the human beings to acquire knowledge and disseminate it, they would not have any importance over the other creatures that we share this universe with. In our tradition, teaching and learning is regarded as a sacred duty, which is not compromised. There was a famous jurist who was referred to as Shams al-Ayyimma as-Sarakhsi. He was a man of phenomenal academic status. He had an extraordinary memory, and he was one of the great thinkers, the leaders of thought in his time. He was from the area that was Transoxiana at that time, part of Iran today. And he passed away in Farghana, which is in Uzbekistan. At one point, he, being a jurist, he questioned the actions of one of the rulers of his time. And the ruler chose to punish him by throwing him in jail or by imprisoning him, let's say. This imprisonment did not happen in a jail as we would know it or imagine it. This imprisonment happened in very strange circumstances. He was imprisoned inside a well. He was put inside this well, and that's where he had to spend this sentence. And, some of you might be imagining, solitary confinement, how that is it's one of the most extreme measures taken against inmates who are misbehaving or whatever the case may be, where they're deprived of light and they're deprived of any social interaction. And he was sentenced to that type of imprisonment for 15 years. So imagine food and water are probably just lowered down for him with some rope, and that's it. Now, the interesting thing about his particular prison was that even though he could not get out, people could come by and stand by. And maybe that was by design so they could see how miserable he was, and so they would take that as a lesson for themselves, and that would drive fear into the hearts of people. But with Imam Sarakhsi, quite the opposite happened. His students started assembling there. First, just to pay homage to him and to try to console him and to pray for him. And he, being who he was and what he was, could not resist but start teaching from there. And from his fantastic memory, he dictated what became his magnum opus. It became one of the most extraordinary books of fiqh that the Muslims have. It is called Al-Mabsut. And today, depending on which edition you get, it exists in somewhere between 15 to 21 volumes. And that was all from here. And that was there at the bottom of that pit where he neither had any sunlight, he didn't have any social interactions, he had to suffer the cold and the dampness. And Allah knows all kinds of miseries in there. But he taught and taught and taught. And what he did from the bottom of that well was preserved. And we still have that book. And we study and teach that book. When the USSR crumbled and the states slowly began to liberate, this was after they had been under the iron fist of communism for about 100 years or so. At that time, the stories emerged. I'm talking about the early 80s, and some of you might still remember this, that when movement finally started to those areas, and from those areas, it was discovered that those people under that communist rule, they were not allowed to have any copy of the Quran. You were not allowed to have a copy of the Quran. You were persecuted, you were imprisoned, and you could be killed. And there was no question of learning and teaching the Quran. But the teachers at that time, the teachers of the Quran, what they did was, there was no other choice. So they resorted to the graveyards. And they would sit in empty graves that had been dug with no one inside. And students would come to them at nighttime, one by one, climb down the grave, get their lesson of the Quran, and then climb back out, and then the next student would come in. So I'm saying these things just to open up our minds that this is a legacy that is not foreign to us from the Islamic tradition. This is a part of who and what we are. And the work of learning and teaching needs to continue under any circumstance and every circumstance, because it is the bloodline of life and of the existence of the human being. So yes, we have some challenges. We are nowhere near the incidents that I have referenced. Nothing like that. We are in, alhamdulillah, still a great deal of comfort. And yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are fears and concerns that surround us from all directions. But our work is a noble work. Yes, you could look at it this way that, oh yeah, they're saying we're going to shift online. Okay, so that's good for me. I get to sit up, in my house on my couch and I get to teach and, it's going to get, you know what? Actions are judged by their intentions and are rewarded based on their intentions. If we intend that this is a noble work that we're doing, irrespective of the fact that this happens to be professions and careers for many people, irrespective of that, if we make the intention that we will continue this noble work of passing on what we have to the next generation to make sure that it is preserved and it continues, then this intention of saving the next generation from ignorance and protecting the next generation from harm, this intention will go a lot further than just thinking that, okay, fine, what online platforms are we going to do? When are you guys going to train us? And how is it going to happen? Instead of working on and thinking about the technicalities, if we think of the mission ahead of us, the importance of it, and what an impact it's going to make, notwithstanding the circumstances, it's going to have a much different effect on our audience, our students. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us safe, and our families, our children, our students and their families, and our communities and the people of the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and keep us safe from this test, keep us healthy, and enable us to get through this with ease and comfort.